Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we will be recapping our reviews from the month of March 2025. This video will feature three things: a discussion of our favorite coffee this month, as well as any honorable mentions, our upcoming coffee of the month, and anything else pertaining to his channel that we feel is worth discussing or addressing. So let's go ahead and get started with our honorable mentions. And as always, these are in order of when we reviewed them on this channel. And before we start, I must say that this might be the most stacked lineup of coffees that we've ever had in one of our monthly recaps, as we will be highlighting 5 coffees, 4 out of 5 of which would be 4 out of 5 of my favorite coffees from the entirety of 2025 up to this point, with the favorite of those 5 coffees being arguably my favorite coffee that we've reviewed this year so far. So let's go ahead and get started with the first one, which is the Gesha Village Lot 24098 Oma, natural processed Ethiopia from Datura, based out of Paris, France. And this was my first experience with this coffee roaster, and I do have to say that it far exceeded my expectations, as we spent so much of last year highlighting the Ngise Gameta sample that we received from Airworks towards the middle of the year. And I do have to say that this coffee might have been even better than the experience that we did have with that sample, as not only did it offer such wonderful clarity, but it also offered a wonderful blueberry bomb-like experience, which does seem to be somewhat extinct with a lot of natural processed coffees these days. In addition to that, it offered such wonderful candied citric sweetness to it as well, giving it some additional depth. And for all of those reasons, I have to say that I was just thoroughly impressed with this coffee through and through. And this is a coffee roaster that we will certainly be keeping an eye on, but we'll discuss that a little bit more, as this is not the last time that we will discuss them in this video. And this coffee is unfortunately no longer available for purchase, and this coffee that we're discussing here isn't either, as it is the El Burro Lot 17 wash processed Panama from Substance Cafe, based out of Paris, France. And this is my favorite coffee that we've ever had from Substance up to this point, which is saying something given that I've had some extremely positive experiences with this coffee roaster up to this moment. And I feel like in most months, this coffee would be my favorite coffee for the entirety of that month, but that just goes to show how much depth there was in this month's worth of reviews. This coffee offered everything that I was looking for in a Panamanian Gesha, with such wonderful clarity and immense florality, and that continues to be in line with the experiences that I do have with this coffee roaster, being on the much cleaner and more enjoyable side of things, with a nice level of intensity to balance all of that out. As mentioned, this one is no longer available for purchase, but Substance is certainly a coffee roaster that we will be revisiting again here, hopefully in the near future. Next up, we have the La Lima wash processed Peru from H&S Coffee Roasters out of Laramie, Wyoming. And this coffee right here might be my favorite wash processed Peruvian Gesha that we've ever reviewed up to this point. As I continuously say when it comes to H&S, trust the process, as this coffee wasn't necessarily the most enjoyable in the first half of our review. But towards the end, after some adjustments and some rest, this coffee did end up being everything that I was looking for from it, with such wonderful clarity, being one of the cleaner coffees that we've reviewed this entire year, with such a wonderful floral experience as well, which continues to be in line with the experiences that we do have from a lot of these ultralight processed or ultralight wash processed coffees from H&S. And this coffee is worth keeping an eye on, as the coffee of the month last month was the El Cerro, which is a different Peruvian Gesha. And both of these coffees are still available for purchase for anybody that is interested. Now, when it comes to H&S's coffees, they do require a lot of rest, which is the main reason we don't have last month's coffee of the month review up yet. But we should have that before the next monthly recap video. And once again, as mentioned, if you guys are interested in this coffee, then it is still available for purchase. Next up, we have the Finca El Paraíso. I believe it's anaerobic thermal shock processed Colombia from Jimmy Beans, based out of Chicago, Illinois. And if you'd have told me at the beginning of the year that we would have a Diego coffee as one of our favorite coffees for the entirety of any month, then I would have been extremely surprised, and I would have had a very wild guess as to maybe it could be a Letty Bermudez coffee or a Luna Bermudez coffee, as I felt like the days of Diego Bermudez's coffees being one of our favorite coffees were long since gone. But that was certainly an exception with this one right here, as this is the closest and best experience I've had when it comes to any of Diego's coffees since the original Letty Bermudas that we reviewed from Manhattan quite a number of years ago now, as this coffee was the closest to that one as well, offering such a wonderful peach forward experience with such wonderful clarity, as well as I have heard some people say that it was clean enough to the point where they could have mistaken this one for a washed processed coffee. I don't certainly think that was the case whatsoever, as you can definitely tell that there is some different processing to it. But as far as it goes, when we're discussing coffees that aren't either natural or washed processed coffees, something that's on the more experimental side of things, I can't quite recall having one that I've enjoyed as much as I did enjoy this coffee. So that's massive credit to Max, the roaster of Jimmy Beans, for this coffee, as I felt like he did an amazing job with this one, given I really don't usually like these coffees. So the fact that I enjoyed this coffee as much as I did is saying quite a bit. For those of you that are curious, we did place our first ever shoebox order, so we will be reviewing some of Max's coffees in the future. And this one is no longer available at the time of recording, as once again, I don't even know if Jimmy Bean still exists as of this moment, so unfortunately you wouldn't be able to get that coffee. And that leads us to my favorite coffee this month, and that is probably not a surprise to people, the Hacienda La Esmeralda Leon wash processed Panama from Datura Coffee. And once again, based out of Paris, France. And Esmeralda is arguably my first love when it comes to coffee, as this is a coffee that I've been enjoying for so many years now, and it's one that I look forward to any opportunity I get. And we did try it from another coffee roaster this month, which was of course Kabuki. But I even mentioned in that review that when it came to comparing these two alongside each other, I just had an extremely strong preference for Datura's version of it. And even with all the wonderful coffees that we've discussed here today, this one was actually the biggest standout of those, as it did offer a lot of the same experience that we had with that El Burro. Very clean and very floral forward, but I felt like the definition, the intensity, the sweetness, the depth of this one was just a little bit better and a little bit more in line with my own preferences. This one was the more impressive of the two coffees that we've also had from Datura, and it's saying a lot that the only two coffees that we've ever had from this coffee roaster are arguably one of my favorite wash processed coffees that we've reviewed on this channel in quite a while, and arguably my favorite natural processed coffee that we might have ever reviewed on this channel. So we have already placed our next Datura order, so that will be coming up here a little bit in the future, but I'm definitely excited to try one of their standard offerings to see how that compares, as well as some of their higher end offerings, including a very limited offering as well. This one, unfortunately, is no longer available for purchase, but I do believe that they have one of the other Esmeralda coffees right now. They are pretty steep, they are pretty expensive. It is a gamble to purchase them, but for me, for somebody that likes these type of coffees, it was definitely worth it. Right, and that takes us to our coffee of the month, which is the Bekele Yatute natural processed Ethiopia from Poem Roasting, based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I'm always completely honest and transparent when it comes to these coffee of the month polls. This is definitely the coffee roaster that I wanted to win that poll, and that's largely because we've had a lot of people reach out to us asking if we could review Poem. And there is, of course, a little bit of a backstory behind this. So we did make it a theme this month to pick out some less known coffee roasters, as a lot of our more recent coffee of the month polls have featured some really big names in the coffee world, H&S, Stock, and it was something that we wanted to explore, giving a spotlight to a slightly smaller roaster. And it did kind of feel like killing two birds with one stone, as I was really looking for an opportunity to review this coffee roaster. And it has certainly caught the attention of a lot of people around the Philadelphia area, as I've heard so many positive things about this coffee roaster going into it. And we have had one cup of this coffee up to this point, and it was a very interesting experience because, as you would imagine, it's not necessarily the lightest roasting coffee roaster out there. I mean, every single one of the coffees that we highlighted, Datura, Substance, H&S, they are some of the lightest roasting coffee roasters in the world, and they're not necessarily on that level. But it was a very interesting first experience that, of course, we will save for the review itself, but I feel like a lot of people might be interested in them if you're looking for something that is a little bit more traditional, especially when it comes to American style of coffee. They have that much more traditional profile, and they do remind me of a lot of the better coffee roasters that we've had, we'll say towards the late 2010s, maybe early 2020s, that are in the American coffee scene. So definitely keep an eye out for them. Definitely happy that this coffee did win. Definitely happy that we get an opportunity to highlight one of these smaller roasters, and I'm certainly hoping to do maybe more of those in the future, as I would love to highlight a lot of these smaller, less known coffee roasters out there. All right, and that takes us to our final thing this month, and this is probably going to be a pretty extensive one. And we did place a poll on our Instagram earlier this month where we are asking about brew methods. So the backstory behind this is two parts. First of which, Brewed by Jay did reach out to us asking if he could ship us the UFO dripper. So here we have the UFO, and we will get into that a little bit more in a little bit. But the second part of that is we did receive a comment on one of our Apollon's Gold videos asking how the coffee might have turned out if we had brewed it with an AeroPress. And it definitely lent itself towards an interesting conversation. So we did place the poll up on Instagram, and we asked people which brewer they would like to see us use, as we've been using the April as our third brewer for a very long time. And let me give you a little bit of the backstory as to how we even went about our model of reviewing based off of brew methods. So we will start with the Chemex, because I'm sure a lot of people are curious as to why we have featured the Chemex for as long as we have, and there are a multitude of reasons. First of which being, it's the first brewer I ever learned to brew with. So 15 years ago, when I first got into coffee, I really didn't know how to taste coffee. And what I had heard and understood was that the Chemex would offer the most cleanliness and clarity. So from that vantage point, it would be the easiest way to learn how to taste coffee. And I think that there is some merit to it, but it could also be bias given that I've been working with that brewer for an extremely long time. But it did help me learn to taste flavors in coffees. Now, it definitely does come with its downside. It doesn't offer the same level of body or acidity, brightness as other brew methods. But for me, it was all about learning how to taste coffee, and it definitely presented a lot of the notes in a much more easy to understand way. And up to this day, it still does. And I've been working with that brewer specifically for 15 years. And as a result, I've gotten extremely familiar with how to use it. We do have a smaller Chemex brewer, so as a result, it doesn't take as much effort to brew such a heavy amount or too much of those coffees. But in addition to that, when we first started this channel, we were brewing every coffee at basically 2 cups, one for me and one for the other person that did start this channel with us. That way we'd have an opportunity to brew them all at the same time, and we could try the same coffee and work through the same coffee. So that's a little bit of the background with the Chemex. I've always been open to replacing the Chemex with another brew method, but it was always going to be until we got to the point where I felt like there was another brew method that was worth replacing it with. The other one is, of course, the V60, and that will never change. Until the end of time, the V60 might be the greatest dripper brewer of all time, and I don't think a lot of people will disagree with that. As far as it goes, I think it's basically the perfect brewer that can come from coffee in general. So that one's here to stay regardless of what happens. It's our 2 conical drippers, and there might be a little bit of overlap and similarity between those 2 brew methods, but it's been working for us up to this moment. Now, the third one was, of course, the April brewer, and it's something that we incorporated, I want to say a couple of years ago now. One of our subscribers, Ben, reached out to us and actually offered to give us an April brewer, and I'm very appreciative of it because I actually really like the April brewer. As far as flat bottom drippers go, I think it's been wonderful. It works extremely well for a number of coffees that we have reviewed. I really like how easy it is to use. There are so many positives to the April brewer, and as a result, we were planning on keeping it for the foreseeable future. Now, some of you that have been around for a very long time might remember that there was a brief span in which we did use the AeroPress, and that's of course how a lot of this started, was when somebody reached out to us and asked if we would be interested in using the AeroPress again. And the AeroPress definitely has its positives, but it also has some pretty significant drawbacks. So originally the drawback was you couldn't brew it in a very big size, and of course they've kind of fixed that issue by having an extra large AeroPress brewer these days. But the much bigger issue and concern I actually have with the AeroPress is it would be extremely difficult to brew the coffees that we've highlighted here today with the AeroPress. I don't think an immersion brewer would work well for these very light profile, delicate Panamanian Geshas, Peruvian Geshas, these Ethiopian coffees that we do review. And for me, it's extremely difficult to justify brewing something like that Hacienda Esmeralda with an AeroPress. And I think a lot of people would probably agree with that. They might even say the same thing for the Chemex, which I can also certainly understand. I don't think an immersion brewer is necessarily good for all coffees. And there are, of course, exceptions to that. I would say that maybe some of the heavier coffees, some of the more developed coffees, yes, the AeroPress is probably a really good fit, and those Apollon's Gold coffees probably would have been great with the AeroPress as well. But for me, going to such an extreme shift of brewing every single coffee with an AeroPress, I feel like is probably honestly out of the question. It does work well with the other brew methods that we do have, and some of the other brew methods that have been suggested to us as well. When it comes to immersion brewers, I'm not going to completely rule it out. I do think it's unlikely that we will ever use an immersion brewer for some of these more delicate coffees. But the one that kept coming up as kind of a write-in was the Next Level Pulsar, which is one that has been suggested to us by Airworks as well. And Airworks does have one of them, and they've offered to let us borrow it. So we're going to be borrowing it and working with it, testing it out, and seeing if we like it in the future. It's not necessarily just an immersion brewer, it's somewhat of a hybrid brewer as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that one turns out. Now, the other part of that is that the other write-in was the Area, which is another flat bottom brewer, if I have that correct, which could be a replacement for either the Chemex or even the April brewer as being a different brew method that we could have, as it would be better to have one conical and one flat bottom brewer that we work with. So that's definitely a possibility, but the winner of that poll was the UFO dripper, which is very popular right now. And given that we had actually already started working with it, then it kind of fit perfectly for us. So we are going to make an adjustment here in the future. Once we're done with the current set of coffees that we are working on, we're going to transition from the April to the UFO dripper and test it out for a little bit and see if we like it. Now, the big selling points to me about the April brewer was that it was extremely easy to find filters, as the Kalita filters work really well for it. It seems like it might be a little bit more difficult to find filters for the UFO brewer, but we will see how that goes. I've worked with it a couple of times right now. I haven't necessarily figured it out yet. Like, I don't think I've gotten the best results from this brewer yet, but for right now, it's the one that we're going to be adjusting to. It's going to be a little bit in the distant future. We definitely have to work through all of the coffees that we're currently on right now, but from that point going forward, we will be doing reviews with the UFO dripper for at least a little while until we kind of get a feeling as to how we feel about it. And the first coffees that we will be using this with is the Sunho coffee. So just one day each, just like we're doing with the April brewer. But I think all of this is to say, I'm very curious about your guys' feedback, as we did have that poll, but I'm still interested to hear what you guys might have to say. We're always open to making adjustments and switching things. Right now it's working well for us, but if there's something that people feel is basically required to get a better picture of coffees in general, whether it be an immersion brewer, whether it be a flat bottom brewer, then obviously we're open to making those sort of adjustments. I just kind of wanted to give my own thoughts on that so I could hear from you guys as well, what sort of feedback you have in relation to that. But that's kind of it. We're going to leave it at that. A little bit longer of a recap video than normal, but I, as always, appreciate you guys for all of the support. So this right here has been a recap of our reviews for the month of March 2025. Thank you for watching.